All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for continuing to stick around with the program we've got going on. And thank you to JD for all of his work organizing. So this session is going to be talking about monitoring and evaluation approaches from Christian development organizations. And I should introduce myself real quick. I'm Peter Brumman. I'm an economics professor at the University of Alabama. And I was drafted to ask the questions and to help facilitate this panel. We have two esteemed colleagues to be able to share their experiences with us. To my left here is Rebecca Redfield. She is the Senior Listening, Monitoring, and Evaluation Manager at Hope International. And then on my far left, we have Emily VanderKlok, who is the Quantitative Research Manager from Compassion International. So to start off, first just some kind of introductions of where you're from, where you're located now, and kind of what you do, how you stay busy on a regular basis. So first, Rebecca.
Sure, thank you so much. As was mentioned, my name is Rebecca Redfield. I serve at Hope International. I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Originally grew up in Texas and sometime in the UK. They don't have similar cultures, in case you were wondering. You can just a lot of cross-cultural experiences growing up. So I now live in Pennsylvania, as I mentioned, and have the privilege of leading Hope's listening, monitoring, and evaluation team that helps us better understand the experience of those that we serve and those that we serve alongside to help us improve the way we serve, fulfill our mission to hopefully honor the Lord and join Him in expanding His kingdom. How do I stay busy day to day? Meetings and emails. Anybody? Anybody? Also trying to learn what it looks like to live with margin, but that's an ongoing question.
That's great. I would love to start with just sharing a couple minutes about how I got where I am. Is that all right? Did we skip that question?
No, that's the next question, but you can.
Okay. All right, we're out of order.
No, that's okay.
Okay. I wanted to share because I have a little bit of a unique trajectory to where I am today. I started out in public health and spent 15 years in public health for underserved populations. So the Spanish-speaking population, rural population. Actually spent 7 years in tribal public health, so an indigenous community. And while, that's a super unique experience, measurement, monitoring, evaluation, data was always something that I was most interested in. So kind of tangentially, while this is going on, I get married to a pastor, and I'm in ministry, and we're serving the Spanish-speaking population, and we're, serving West Michigan in lots of different ministry capacities. So I decided, let's get a degree in my three passions. So I have a degree in spirituality, culture, and health with a focus on research. And it was about that time that I decided, let's make this full-time. Let's go full-time in this data world that I love so much. And I intentionally sought out this role with Compassion. So I've been with Compassion for about 3.5 years. I've had various roles in the MERL team and currently manage the quantitative research team. So that's 7 direct reports around the U.S. I spend a lot of my time in meetings as well, lots and lots of meetings, and also get to do some design work. So I love that part of it. I love tackling big challenges, and I love measuring the intangible. Those are things that really feed my soul. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, if I didn't mention that, and work every day with my 2 giant golden doodles sitting at my feet.
Thank you. That's excellent. And so I'll give Rebecca a chance to say, why do you work in monitoring and evaluation?
Sure. I realize I should have mentioned tenure. I've been with Hope for 8 years now. So why monitoring and evaluation for me? I started my journey in international development, ministry and international development, not exposure. About a decade ago, I interned at a microfinance institution in the Dominican Republic, and my role was focused on communications and marketing. And so I spent my days traveling and meeting with associates and interviewing them and capturing their stories. And I was troubled because I started being able to tell in the midst of conversation if their story would be shared or it would not be shared, which left me wondering, where's the space for the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that's in the work of listening, monitoring, and evaluation, believing that each person's voice and experience matters. And I love the work of creating space, of setting a table, especially to elevate and honor the voices that often would not be heard. Because we don't grow and do better if all we hear is applause for ourselves. We need to hear what's not working so that we can honor their feedback and respond. So that's why I love Emily.
Wow, I think that's a good answer. So next, tell me a little bit about your organizations and what are the few of the largest programs and the theories of change behind those programs.
Me? Okay. Mix it up. So Compassion is known for holistic childhood development and releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. Now, holistic child development is, it's broad, right? So we have all kinds of programs, from maternal child health programs all the way to career readiness programs. We operate under a global outcomes framework. And that global outcomes framework is a pretty high-level logic model, if you will. And we tend to do our measurement at like the level 2 level.
What does that mean? What does level 2 model mean?
Okay, I wish I had a graphic to show you. I could share it with you, or if you were, I could email it to you if you're interested. But we have 4 main areas. We have growth in Christ. We have the health domain, which is physical and mental health. We also measure economic self-sufficiency and youth agency. And then each of our activities and interventions feed into that model, if you can kind of picture it at the bottom. So we have subdomains under each of those, and then the activities would plug in below that.
So at Hope International, our mission is to invest in the dreams of families and the world's underserved communities as we proclaim and live the gospel. It's a lot of words. What does that look like played out? We follow a simple theory of change that's been really our bread and butter, if you will. That's a colloquial phrase for like our core. I need to be culturally sensitive in terms of the phrases that I use. So it's been at our core since our founding around 26 years ago now. So we think about 3 C's: access to appropriate capital mobilization within the context of community with a focus on Christ. Capital, community, and Christ. And we have 2 main models and methodologies. First is savings groups. These are designed as a ministry of the local church where individuals gather regularly, study God's word, and pool their savings together. There's no external capital injection. That's an important aspect or definer of our model. And in gathering together, they're then able to access a lump sum of money, also give out loans through their pooled capital, and we also see many groups that are then responding in generosity to their community. So that's savings groups. Again, a key note is these are owned and led by the church. These are not programs of Hope International. So think about implications in terms of evaluation and all kinds of things there. Second, we have microfinance institutions. These are banks that give access to capital for those that are underserved, for entrepreneurs. So they, in many cases, start with a group loan using social collateral if they don't have typical collateral to offer, because these are underserved entrepreneurs. They're invested in through their group, studying the word together, invested in by their loan officers. We also have small and medium enterprise lending for those that graduate or enter the institution with a larger business. In terms of scope, so Hope International is a network of both Hope managed and partner-led institutions. So we're currently serving 600,000 individuals as of the end of last year. All the data people are like, when is your data from? End of last year. To date, since our founding 26 years ago, we've served 2.6 million individuals and dispersed $1.5 billion in loan capital.
Thank you. All right, so now on to the key question. How do you measure the effectiveness of these programs? Be specific. Which methodologies are you being used, and what kind of evidence do you find most informative?
I don't care. Okay. I'll just keep going then. We'll pass it on. So effectiveness, what do we mean? I think what often comes to mind first is impact. And that's part of it, but what lays the foundation for impact? We need to know if our programs are working and for whom and in what ways. So we think about success or effectiveness through the lens of 3 concepts. First, operational quality and efficiency. We need to know if our model is being implemented as designed. Otherwise, our evaluation is not going to be helpful or as helpful as it could be. I'd like to give a little highlight or shout out if I may. We have a data analytics team. Jenny Hudson is here and Jess Kunkel. If you could just raise your hands for a second. Thank you. Higher! If you're interested in learning more about some of the work around how we are making the most of our data that's being gathered within our core operations, these are team members to talk to. They support programs in that way and provide great insights. So first, operational quality and efficiency. There's a lot more there. I could give this whole talk on that. If you're interested, we'll talk later. Second, thinking about what Sarah shared earlier, we measure experience. So imagine somebody is experiencing transformation, but they're being mistreated. Is that impact? Absolutely not. That's not success. It's insufficient and incomplete. So we measure experience, like would somebody recommend that somebody else join this program? That matters for success. And then what we're all familiar with, holistic impact, which we measure through the lens of 4 domains, drawing from Bryant Meyer's work: spiritual, social, material, and personal. So to dive a bit deeper there, we've developed a tool called the Hope Quotient to measure holistic change. It's taken on a few forms over the years. It used to be a 3-year longitudinal survey. We've transitioned for hours long worth of conversation over dinner if you want it. Lots of reasons why. And now it takes the form of sampling proportionally across tenure categories and also including a comparison group or a benchmark to make meaning of the data. And then we conduct, with the support of the data analytics team, statistical analysis of findings to explore differences between these groups that are matched based on demographics and lots of criteria. For a little bit more detail on what we're measuring, within the social domain, we're measuring strength of relationships marked by trust and support, both within fellow group members and relationships with program staff. Within the material domain, we're measuring financial capacity and financial management skills. We draw from the World Bank's Findex survey for a question about financial resilience. Within the spiritual domain, we're measuring engagement with a local church, discipleship, being discipled and discipling others, by whom, for whom, and in what ways, and engaging scripture, growing in ability and comfort learning from scripture and applying it to daily life. Always convicting. We can learn a lot, but if it doesn't change who we are, I think there's continual invitations for all of us in that. And lastly, for the personal domain, we measure agency, dignity, and hope. We are on a learning journey. All of our materials are open source. If anyone would like to see the survey, glad to share that. I would also invite your feedback because we're better together. 2 other things that I would highlight in terms of what measuring effectiveness looks like. We recently partnered with 60 decibels. Is anybody familiar with 60 decibels? By nod of the head. 1. Thank you, James. So 60 decibels developed the first financial inclusion social performance report centered in customer voice. So the microfinance index includes 72 MFIs from 41 countries and is, to our knowledge and their marketing, the only index available to measure outreach impact and other indicators to understand how our MFIs are rating against other MFIs that have participated. So that's been really helpful to make meaning of the data through having benchmarks to compare against. In the last few years, we've had a significant increase in our emphasis on agriculture as a complementary service with our savings group program. So we have run or in the process of running 3 different DIDs, difference and differences studies, to understand the effectiveness to inform future expansion. And we're in conversation now. I can't share too much detail. I can't over dinner, but this is being recorded. So we may potentially be running an RCT for a complementary service that is not our model, but it's through individuals that we're serving in Ukraine. So a unique opportunity for partnership with an academic leader who's a friend of many. But if anyone wants to talk more about that, but that's something new, that would be our first RCT, but again, not of our core model. So.
Thank you.
Great. Wow, that's a lot. Compassion is in the process right now of undergoing a huge overhaul, both in how we implement program and then how we measure programs. We're calling it Program Cycle Adoption, PCA. So as we see so much in sector, there's a lot of top-down, like dictating to people on the ground, how they do program, right? And that makes it really easy to measure when you're in impact evaluation, when everyone's doing the same thing, right? But we're kind of flipping that model on its head a bit. And our focus right now is to get data into the hands of the people on the ground making programmatic decisions, actually implementing those programs. So we are getting data in the hands of like more than 9,000 pastors and program directors, and allowing them to make decisions about their program and about the actual needs in their area and what interventions that they're going to focus on for their children. This has been a huge shift for us. So just try to imagine that, right? It's a huge undertaking to do this. So we're in the process of scaling this. The first step in this was to actually figure out what are we going to measure that will accurately demonstrate the needs for the people on the ground making these decisions, and then measuring outcomes. So our process is we're planning to do this every 3 years. We've started, I think we're in our third or fourth country right now. We started in Tanzania, and we went in and we first did a little test with 20% of the churches in our program, and then rolled it out to the rest, and walked these pastors and program directors through a process of looking at their data and how do I use this to identify the top needs. We are actually in the process of developing an app that each of these churches can utilize to look at their own data and then make those decisions about top needs, and then tie that to evidence-based interventions. So right now, I would say our Merle team has a bit of a mixed focus. One of those focuses is getting that data in the hands of the people on the ground to make those decisions. And then the other part is really making sure we're choosing evidence-based interventions. So how do we go about measuring the impact at the intervention level to make sure that national offices and churches can choose, what would work best in their context. And that's where my team really comes into play. We are very focused on the actual attributable impact. So we predominantly use quasi-experimental methods, and which usually, we have a counterfactual. It might be, matching with PSM. Sometimes we do difference and differences, like you mentioned. And if there are interventions that maybe have shown promise elsewhere, but we're trying it in a new context, that would be a good place for us to do impact evaluation. Or sometimes we get interventions that are really grassroots, and this is happening in one, part of the country, and we want to know, is this actually effective? So Compassion is developing a catalog of interventions that countries and churches can then pick from and prioritize those and make sure they have, those evidence-based interventions.
Excellent, thank you. Those are great answers from both of you. So let's go on to the challenges. What are the greatest program measurement and design challenges you are currently facing?
We don't have any. Yeah. As believers in this space, we are all called and invited to participate in the greatest commandment of loving God with all that we are and all that we have, and loving our neighbors as ourselves. And an ongoing challenge is, how does that practically translate into our work? How is listening itself, evaluation itself, an act of love? What does it look like to model Jesus' way of disrupting power dynamics to elevate those on the margins in the midst of the day-to-day of evaluation design, of choosing questions, of choosing a methodology, analysis, and reporting? As a team, we say and believe and seek to grow in this idea that listening is ministry. We believe it's an intervention in and of itself. We've learned some hard lessons over the years about how certain questions that might yield really interesting data can be dishonoring, they can be shame-inducing. How do we look over our questions with a keen eye towards the experience of those being asked these questions and prioritize their experience over the interesting data we would analyze? These are questions that we're asking, challenges framed as questions. How might we build systems and processes so that those being listened to benefit the most from this process, that our work may not be extractive, but additive, even restorative or redemptive. We continue to struggle with effective ways to close the feedback loop with those who participate in the survey. I so appreciated learning from this emphasis, Emily, and excited to talk more, to follow up with them, share key insights, and invite their ongoing engagement with the information. Of course, as many people can relate to, spiritual metrics in particular is always a journey of evolving growth and learning and seeking to ground in humility. There's a lot of power that evaluators hold, and how you steward that power in seeking to understand other stories, often across many cultures, it's a weighty responsibility. And as we focus on program measurement, there's a very real conversation about where our resources are best served and the opportunity cost. Funds spent for research purposes are funds that are thus not being invested directly through programming in the communities we're serving. I remember hearing a quote from a colleague of mine, a Rwandan colleague, who shared, I'm not sure where it came from, they said something like, what would the world look like if all of the money spent researching the poor, their words, was actually given to them? That's convicting for a room of evaluators, right? It's convicting for me. Those are things that stick with you. So like getting practically, we hired a consultant to do a comparison group evaluation that cost $30,000. It cost $25 to serve one person for 1 year. That is a lot of people that were not served because of choosing to do this evaluation. It was really interesting. It yielded interesting information. Does that mean we should do comparison groups and counterfactuals in every program? I don't know. I wrestle with those things because it's a question of stewardship. We want to better understand what's working and what's not working so we can better serve communities. But there's a cost. There's a cost. And who counts that cost? Not me. That's the truth. Not me. Not the people doing the evaluations. It's the people that might not be served. So what does that look like for us? On average, where we've landed is like 1 to 5% of our operating expenses for programs and for the overall company budget goes towards listening, monitoring, and evaluation. Is that the right amount? I don't know. I would love to hear from you. So these are some of the questions and challenges we continue to wrestle with, and I certainly welcome the wisdom of the room in ongoing conversations in these areas and beyond.
Thank you.
Great. Take a moment and just imagine what it would be like to have to do massive amounts of data collection in 26 countries with over 9,000 churches and all of the logistics involved in that. Think about starting with even building the tool, building questions that are relevant in all of those contexts. Then think about all of the translation that goes into that. Uganda alone is 13 different translations for us. And we have a really robust process for that, right? Like we actually have 2 people translate it, and then they combine it, and then there's back translation, and it's a process. And then think about the data collection, the hiring of enumerators, the managing of the data that's coming in, making sure you're hitting the right response rates for this to actually, be able to draw the conclusions you need to. Think about even, tablet procurement in all of those countries, making sure it's not tied up at the border, getting it in the right hands. And then validation. Validating all of those instruments in all of those contexts and languages and different age groups. We're doing data collection in 6 to 22-year-olds. It's a huge undertaking. Everything from even like login administration on those tablets and the different survey platforms. It's just massive. So I think the biggest challenge for us is scaling this endeavor and all of the logistics involved in that. We often feel like we're building the plane as we're flying it, which is a little bit of a difficult place to be for some people. I happen to love a good challenge, so it's a good place for me to be. But then imagine now doing all of this while you're also changing organizational culture, when you're trying to get to that healthy metrics culture and you're trying to move away from measurement feeling punitive to it being empowering. That this is for you to make, changes to benefit your children in your community. It's a huge shift for compassion, and it's a pretty big undertaking. I think another challenge that I have mentioned to a few of you individually is both retrofitting measurement. We feel like we're doing that a bit. We're brought in at maybe a time that's not ideal and say, okay, measure this. Oh goodness, here we go. But then also, because we're being so contextual on the ground, how do you find the common components to measure impact when things are being implemented a little bit differently? Or maybe there's an intervention bundle. This church is doing 3 in this area, and this church is only doing 1. How do you actually isolate that impact and say this is the attributable impact? So it is an ongoing challenge for us, but it's a good challenge. And it's a lot of fun, and we're really enjoying the creativity in this moment and calling in different people to solve these awesome challenges that we have.
Great, thank you. To the audience, be preparing your questions. I think we're almost to the end of our script. I have a question or two that I'm going to ask myself, but we're going to, in a minute, I'm going to open up to the floor for other questions. And to Emily and Rebecca, I'm going to go off script. So so speak. You kind of mentioned this a little bit, but speak more about a challenge, if it is a challenge, about the differing in values placed on monitoring and evaluation and listening from your leadership of your organizations to your team, obviously, but also like the implementers, like the people on the ground. Do they value the listening, monitoring, and evaluation? Do they push back against it? Do they appreciate it? Kind of speak to that kind of the value placed on monitoring and evaluation from both the above and below.
Sure. I would say that overall, Hope has a very strong listening culture. What we continue to grow in is being more of a data-informed culture. And that plays out in a couple of different ways. Timing our decisions to after we have the data. So like we're doing some great DIDs, but we've already decided that we're going to scale the program. So I'm like, why are we doing this? Glad we are. But it's like, well, there's a lot of demand from church partners. We can't wait X number of years to tell them and just not do anything until then. It's like evaluation in the real world. Like that's just a dynamic of, are we planning enough in advance for these evaluations? I'm trying to think beyond that. I'm trying to think who was sharing earlier this morning about, I think it was Lincoln. Like your team's really popular when the findings are positive and not so popular when they're not. I think that's a dynamic for our colleagues. So I manage a team of 4 that then supports global program leads. So each program has at least one person who's responsible for listening, monitoring, and evaluation. So we support them. We don't manage, but we support them kind of like consultants. And I remember hearing from one of them that I was nominated for the staff award, a staff culture award, after I presented this report with the findings that were really positive. But then everybody's quiet if it's not positive. Or my personal favorite, slightly irritating, is what was the translation? It's we don't care about the translation until we disagree with the results. Always important to verify the translation, but let's talk about it for every question, not just ones we disagree with. So I would say overall, there's engagement. Part of the journey that we're on is shifting from probably 5 years ago, more of the evaluation agenda coming from the head office and shifting culture to inviting programs, say what aligns with your strategy, what are your key research questions. That's an ongoing journey and shifting ownership of what do you want to evaluate, not just evaluating what is part of a network agenda.
We have a ton of leadership support, which is a great place to start. Our president, Jimmy Mulatto, just has so much respect for being data-driven and for the Merle team. And they've invested a ton in our team because they really care about effectiveness and that we are good stewards of the money that's given to us and that every dollar is having the most impact that it can have. So that's really helpful. That's a great place to start. We do have a little bit of a history of not always using data in the most constructive way. So that's where some of the tension comes more at the field level and managing those expectations and those relationships and saying up front, like, hey, this is for you. And it's been a consistent, messaging challenge, I guess. Things are shifting. I do feel it happening. And as each new country goes through the process and they have a positive experience and that starts being communicated, to their friends across the next country over, I think it's going really well for us, but it's something that we're continually managing.
Thank you. One more specific question for Emily. You talked about trying to share the data with the program managers, like the pastors out in the field. What kind of data literacy do they have? And then, and also kind of the second half of this kind of goes to both of you of, is there pushback about you're measuring the wrong stuff? Like they're more focused on the intangibles, the immeasurables, and so like, yeah, this is what your results show, this is what the data shows, but we're more interested in the stuff that the data can't show. And so how do you respond to that or those types of things?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. We try really hard to get buy-in really early on in the process. And we actually have people in the field at the national office and representatives that they choose reviewing every item in our instrument and giving feedback on every single item as part of our construct and item level review that we do. So that buy-in is really important. At the national office level, they do have an opportunity to ask us to add constructs. Like, oh, this is really important to us, and then we can customize the tool a bit. What was your first question? Remind me one more time.
Data literacy of the pastors.
Yes.
Like when you share the data or the results.
Yes. So that is a challenge because it is a wide range of data literacy, even at the national office level, but particularly at the pastor. I'm married to a pastor, you guys. He has multiple degrees. I don't think he could do what we're asking them to do with this data. So we are really blessed to have a robust knowledge management team, and they spend a lot of time building training content for our different audiences on how to use the data at their level. So without that, I don't know that we could operate in this model without our knowledge management team doing that work and going before. They're actually building training that starts months before they get their data. So they're taking online modules, in-person education before they even open their app and see their data.
Thanks. Rebecca.
Sure, some similar approaches in terms of buy-in from the very beginning. There's a big mix of assessments that we do. A few of them are standardized and many of them are contextualized or just developed for the program. So we don't develop that and say, here you go. Like we start from the very beginning in building a research design of what do you want to evaluate. We always are trying to go back to, this is for you, what do you think? I'd love to hear what you think. Help me understand how this information will be useful to you. So very collaborative in building. For the tools that are standardized, when they were designed, our biggest one, the Hope Quotient, a couple of years back, we had a steering committee with representation from across the organization. So it's an ongoing journey. We standardize at the outcome level. We have flexibility at the indicator level. One of the saddest days in my career was traveling in one of the countries where we serve, conducting a review of a previous iteration of the Hope Quotient, and one of my colleagues said, I don't think our culture was taken into account when this question was designed. That was a sad day, and we've learned, and that's why we standardize at the outcome level, shift and modify at the indicator level now. We're not trying to do the same survey across all of our countries, which is what we were doing before. It didn't work.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, anybody else in the room have some questions? We'll start in the front since you're the easiest.
I've got a couple, so maybe pick one. I'll make them quick. First question, coming off the back of Lincoln's honesty, and I really respect how both of you have pretty robust frameworks for spiritual impact, right? The Hope Quotient, growth in Christ, what have either of you seen like robust change over time in that, and what does it look like knowing that it's really hard to capture over time? And secondly, and you can ignore this one, do you see any ways that tech could really democratize and reduce the level of just the cost of impact evaluation, right? So through data collection, so for example, phone surveys, but with groups that don't charge you a lot for them because they actually don't cost very much, right? Or even I now have partners who do data analytics that I actually think could get rid of potentially whole teams of analysts. Not that I want to do people out of a job, but it would just say, so yeah, they're my two questions.
I can go. Fine. Great questions, fantastic questions. To answer the first one, we haven't had consistent measurement in spiritual formation until recently. So I don't have a good longitudinal response to that. However, I was the one who got to develop it, and it was one of the most fun things I've done in my career. So with my background in spirituality, culture, and health, I was able to look at multidimensionally, how do we measure spiritual formation in children and adolescents from 6 to 22 across that age range, and the different drivers of spiritual formation. So building that framework was an absolute blast and truly one of the most fun things I've ever done in my life, and then validating that in different countries. So I am really excited to see how that progresses over the years and what that data looks like over the years. Yeah, what was the second part?
Tech. The role of
Tech. So I think because we are a child sponsorship organization, we really need that enumerator to do our data collection. Most of our kids don't have, that level of technical skill. One of our surveys we are doing with older youth is tablet-based and not enumerated. Yeah. And that has gone pretty well with an older population, but our younger population, I think, will stay enumerated.
Yeah. To the first question, the honest answer is sometimes all the data points get jumbled in my head. So across all the countries. So perhaps we could carry this conversation further offline because we just had some new data. So there are a couple of different levels of comparing treatment to control, and then also analysis within groups. So we're no longer doing longitudinal surveys.
Right.
I think we've seen more differences in terms of treatment versus control, but don't quote me on that. I honestly just need to pull up the most recent reports. For the second question, maybe it depends on the population. I'd say more likely for our microfinance institutions than our savings group programs because of varying literacy levels and also thinking about our belief of listening as ministry and having somebody travel hours to you says something. You were worth me traveling and then taking a moto and then hiking up this hill because I value your story. We don't want to miss that, but it's a continual conversation.
Thanks. Next.
Thanks so much. I've heard you talk about methods of evaluation like propensity score matching and diff and diff. Those are great. I'm curious as the obstacles to randomizing. I think you can, in the right circumstances, learn all you need to learn from a diff and diff or other quasi-experiment. But with randomizing, measurement is hard, but if you're doing all the measurements and you've got some people who are getting your program, I would think that the main difficulty with randomizing is just being able to say when you're rolling out the program, the places you roll out, there are some you choose and some you don't. But I'm just curious as to the obstacles to using that.
So I would say for our savings group programs, we don't own the programs. So we can't decide this community doesn't and this community does because it's owned by the church. So there are some tricky dynamics there of we wouldn't say to a church community, you can't serve that community until. So in Zimbabwe right now, we've found a helpful comparison group of another Doma community that is not able to be served for different reasons. I think one of the main challenges is we don't call the shots in terms of who's served and who's not because it's not a program that we own. For our microfinance institutions, it's demand driven, so finding it's a very small group of people population if you're zeroing in on like SME clients who would take a loan of a certain size and are qualified for that. There's a lot of specificity there. So honestly, there hasn't been a lot of demand or desire at the organization level to randomize, so we've just tried to get creative in terms of reasonable comparison groups, like who might be served next in a population that we're not able to expand to yet. So maybe more to come.
Yeah, I think cost, time, ethics, and migration are probably the ones coming to my mind right off the bat. We do have a lot of migration that happens in a lot of our communities, so randomizing and then tracking over time would be a bit of a challenge for us. And I do know, ethically, we want to serve as many people as we can that financially we can reach in that poverty.
Great, thank you. JD.
Hi, thanks. Really enjoyed the panel. And I have like two EA-ish questions to ask. And you can, like with James, just pick one or both to answer. So the first is maybe coming from the perspective of a giver, which is how can I, with dollar by dollar, have the greatest impact with my donation? And so my question is about like kind of certainty related to marginal impact. For marginal dollars donated, how can you assure donors in like the most, the best way possible what specific outcomes are associated, especially when there are many programs at large organizations, especially very large organizations that have many different programs and $100+ million yearly budgets. How do we know that like donating $5,000 leads to what outcome? Second question is like maybe related with regards to how the orgs themselves compare different outcomes. So some groups do like, and this is a very crude way to put it, but like we would say, doubling the income of a poor household living in extreme poverty is roughly as good as treating a specific disease. So do you have any kinds of trade-offs internally that you use to kind of assess outcomes at your organizations?
You want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
I'll give it a shot. Thanks, JD. So first, in terms of marginal impact, when we think about a theory of change, so much depends on the activities, and so there are certain outcomes that there's a higher likelihood for, and there are certain outcomes that aren't because we don't control, except mostly within the microfinance context. We provide access to capital in the context of community with a focus on Christ. Somebody has a lump sum of money, they decide how to use it. So we can't guarantee that education rates will go up, that housing will improve, because we don't control it. So it depends if somebody's wanting to see like these specific outcomes. With my $5,000, I want to see XYZ change. Would like have to align with the theory of change. So it kind of depends in terms of level of control and intentionality of activities driving towards very specific outcomes. I think about efficiency metrics as well as like average loan size and cost per person, understanding some of those pieces. And in terms of how we compare outcomes, I don't think we've had that conversation in terms of what's better for who at this point. I would say the biggest thing is that we desire to see holistic change. So if you're seeing material impact and no spiritual transformation, that's not success. Like we wouldn't say $100 more income per year and no deeper relationships, they're further isolated in the community. Like I would say of the 4 domains, like spiritual and material would be weighted most, and then social and personal, just my personal take on it.
Great. I want to just make sure I understood your first question. So it was your first question about like impact related to like dollar for dollar? Like are we looking at how much impact each dollar has on an outcome area?
So say somebody donates $100,000
Yeah.
and earmark it towards something. How do we know that like money isn't just shifted around in such a way that like the counterfactual isn't really there? Like how would you assure a donor of the counterfactual value of a marginal donation? Does that make sense?
I think so. It's a great question. I think there are a lot of things in compassion that I'm not involved in, and this might be one of them. I would ensure, like if I were talking to a donor, I would talk about just ethically how compassion stewards money. And compassion is a fantastic steward. They are really trying to be as lean as possible and making sure that everything that we do to as much as we can is effective, right? Like we are measuring it. We're using theories of change and outcomes frameworks, and making sure that we have the right indicators. So Compassion does do a great job of financial stewardship. I don't know if that really answers the question, but there's probably someone better at Compassion to answer it than me. And then what was the second one was comparing outcomes. We are not even attempting to compare outcomes right now. It's something we've talked about doing in the future. We do have a weighting system, like you mentioned, where on our app, they can prioritize different outcome areas, and there are a few different weighting systems that we use. So in the algorithm, one of the inputs is if you picture like the pyramid where you have the foundational and secondary and tertiary, all of our indicators and outcomes are put in that kind of a model. So then we can put more weight on the more foundational outcomes. And then there's another input into the algorithm that is looking at, what is that church value? Are there different areas that they would prioritize over others? So then it can spit out comparative need, but that's a little bit different, I think, than what you're asking in terms of the outcome.
That's all.
Well, we're out of time, so I apologize. If you have more questions, please approach Emily and Rebecca afterwards. I'm sure they'll be happy to talk. So give a quick round of applause. Thank you.